And let's move to our second discussion. As the Nigerian economy continues to show signs of gradual improvement despite growing macroeconomic challenges, the International Monetary Fund has again raised the red flag over the country's economy, indicating that the nation faces significant risk from the COVID-19 pandemic trajectory, with oil prices and price uncertainty and series of security challenges. According to the global lender, in its latest article, the Nigerian economy, though a recovery from its historic downturn due to government policy support, rising oil prices and international financial assistance, will need major reforms in the fiscal, exchange rate, trade and governance areas so as to maintain a long-term, inclusive and sustainable growth. The IMF, however, commended the government's proactive management of the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic impacts, but highlighted the urgency of fiscal consolidation to create policy space and reduce debt sustainability risk. I introduced him earlier. He's joining us via Zoom. He's a senior manager at tax regulatory at Deloitte, Mr. Najim Yusuf. Mr. Yusuf, it's good to see you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon, VS, for having me today.
Yeah, let's get talking now. IMF has raised fresh concerns over the state of Nigeria's economy, and of course, this is not new. Despite the recovery in oil prices, implicit fuel subsidies, and high security spending adopting the positive impacts. Now, there is no surprise element here, as these are issues the global body has always raised concern about. Like I said, it's not new. What do you think will be difficult to tilt to the course of our economic direction, to the path IMF is charting?
Okay, so thank you for that question. So I must first say that the path IMF is charting will require tough decisions to be able to go that route. And so they are not easy things to do. And because they require tough decisions, I don't expect it to be exactly convenient for the government. So I'll say that I kind of align with you to say that it's pretty going to be difficult to take those kind of tough decisions to align with IMF's expectation. But the reality is that if that's the way to go, then we have to go that route. And for example, I'm going to start with subsidy. And we've been talking that for subsidy removal for several years, and we've never had the courage to remove subsidy. And I mean, it's clear that it's injurious to the economy. I mean, it increases the risk of government having to borrow year in, year out, and you have a higher debt service to revenue ratio. And of course, you then technically fund other neighboring countries. I mean, you technically subsidize other neighboring countries because there's also the risk that some of these subsidized products are leaving the shores of Nigeria, the borders of Nigeria to neighboring countries, and which is not exactly efficient. So at some point, government has got to be able to take the bull by the horn to take the right decision to remove subsidy. But I think this has to be done with some form of human face, with some form of planning. For example, I do not think that it makes sense to remove subsidy in one go. Also, all of a sudden, fuel price moves from say 165 naira a liter to 320 naira a liter, for example. That's going to be extremely injurious. I mean, a lot of people will just become poor immediately. People will become double as poor as they were just because fuel prices increased. I mean, something that will work is to maybe face the removal over a period of say 10 years. For example, I mean, in 2012, there was serious conversation around subsidy removal, but it didn't happen. Assuming that we started removing phases from 2012 till date, maybe we would have been done with it. Maybe we would have been able to cope with it over time. Maybe there would have been alternative fuels that can be as cheap as subsidized petrol without having to subsidize those. For example, I mean, there are conversations around compressed natural gas. I mean, and there are views that says that even without subsidizing CNG, it can give you the same power, the same energy that you would get from using petrol at a much cheaper rate. I mean, so those are kind of conversations that we should be having. Yes, I mean, I kind of think that at some point subsidy has to go, but it's got to be faced. There's got to be some cheaper alternatives that Nigerians can also cope with. Then about production issues, of course, oil prices are good, so you will expect naturally that our oil revenue will continue to rise. But sadly, we've not been doing well with our production. I mean, in the last 1 year, we've not met OPEC quota. Just in January alone, we fell short of OPEC allocated quota by $200 200,000 barrels per day. I mean, this would have been our opportunity to boost production, increase revenue significantly, close our budget deficit. So government needs to take that. And the main issues are actually around security in the Delta region. There's a lot of sabotage in the oil field. There's a lot of sabotage in the pipelines. I mean, there's some areas where you had as much as 80% production and pipeline losses. I mean, so it means you pump in 100,000 barrels into a pipeline, and at the other end of the pipeline, you only come out with 20,000 barrels. That's significant losses that is just going because there's no adequate security within that. So government needs to be serious, a lot more serious about security, just more dealing with the issues. I mean, so that you can raise your revenues to help you, I mean, close your gap, help you reduce the risk of having to borrow, puts less pressure on you to remove subsidy almost immediately because you want to reduce the risk of borrowing. So I mean, all in all, I think they are pretty much tough decisions to make for the government, and because it's a pre-election year, I mean, it's unlikely that government is going to be willing to take all those tough decisions because it impacts their chances at the polls and what have you.
Very great stuff there. And as part of the solutions being proposed, let's look at some of them. Strong need for major reforms in the fiscal and exchange rates. Of course, trade policies and governance areas to lift long-term and, of course, inclusive growth. With this marking the pre-election year, which you also alluded to in your first submission, many analysts are not optimistic that any change will come to bear, as activities from the second half of the year would rather be politicking, that are consolidating on all these reforms. What's your reaction to this?
So I said that view is quite popular, and that approach to governance in this part of the world is not very strange. Many developing countries in this part of the world are known not to do a lot of activities in a pre-election year because there's a lot of focus in coming back into power or supporting some other persons to get back into power. So it's not unusual in our part of the world to expect that activities, I mean, governance activities will lose that. So expectedly, one shouldn't expect to see any major reform in whether it's a monetary reform or it's a fiscal reform or maybe it's a reform around it. It's unlikely to have, except for reforms that have been initiated and you're just trying to finalize them. Other than that, if anything has not been initiated before now, I do not expect to see any great movement in that space. But beyond policy reforms, beyond the fiscal policy reforms or maybe monetary policy reforms, I think the current government has tried to put some mechanism in place to help governance in some aspect to function well, even outside the core scope of the executive. And for example, I'll talk about the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund. It's one fund that the government has created to be able to fund capital expenditure projects within Nigeria, and it's technically carved out of the executive, even though it's still subject to the executive, but they also function well without the direct intervention of maybe the minister or the president or his chief of staff. I mean, those activities go on well. So even when there's a lot of political activities, because of the way that fund has been set up, we expect that governance in that space, at least for the purpose of doing capital projects, will continue to happen. Politicking is not going to delay it. Election is not going to delay it. You also talk about the road infrastructure tax scheme. It's technically government has outsourced in a way the role of carrying out some road infrastructure projects to private companies. So they're paying, instead of paying taxes in cash, they're paying their taxes in form of constructing roads that are near to their business activities. Of course, it's a road that government should have done in the first place. And that will continue to happen whether there's politics or whether there's election or not. So yes, correct to say that from a reform, fiscal policy, public policy perspective, I don't expect a lot to happen. But if you look beyond that, if you are focusing on looking at whether government will be able to continue the project they've promised to do, I think that will continue to happen, barring other factors. So, for example, I mean, one of those other factors is the case of subsidy. The executive is going to try to sponsor a supplementary budget to be able to fund the subsidy of 3 trillion naira. I mean, if that goes in, there's a risk that if you're not able to raise funds elsewhere, whether from revenues or from additional borrowing, then there's a chance that capex may suffer. I mean, maybe some of those capital projects may suffer. But beyond this kind of constraints, there's already a system in place to ensure that capital projects will continue to be in progress, whether or not active government participants in government are vying for elected positions or not. So the elections are not likely to impact those kinds of projects, those kind of activities.
Let's move on now.
And then,
Like we said earlier, that Buhari administration have actually succumbed to pressures and are postponing the removal of petrol subsidies by 18 months. Well, Finance Minister also said that there are plans to eliminate it by, that was what we heard earlier. But the IMF insists that Nigeria must put a stop to this. The oil and gas expert here earlier talked about that. Now, let me ask you this way. How much of an economic toll would this move have on the revenue base and generation strategy, as well as budget deficit?
okay, so what is going to do if you, I mean, from the government perspective, when you take away subsidy, what it means is that your budget deficit is slimmer. So you are in less need for having to borrow. You probably have more capacity to carry out capital projects. It probably does not have any direct impact on revenues, because what it does is just to reduce your expenditure. It doesn't touch your revenue in any way. So it's something government is typically motivated to do. If they ignore, if you're yet to look about the impact on the economy of Nigerians, but from the perspective of government to be able to fund the kind of projects that's promised to do, government to be willing to. It's easier for government to remove subsidy, because there's less pressure to be able to fulfill those projects. So I mean, and that's on the other side. The other bit is that the reality is that you really cannot ignore how this impacts the economy as a whole, because I mean, transportation impacts a large part of what we do. I mean, and for example, take agriculture. The bulk of the cost of getting agricultural produce to the market is tied down to transportation, and the bulk of our transportation is fueled by PMS. And so what it means is that if you take away subsidy, the price of PMS goes up immediately, the price of foods goes up immediately. And because there's a lot more poorer people in Nigeria than people who are not poor, it means that food inflation is going to increase. But the bulk of the income of most Nigerians is spent on food. It's just spent on food. And so once the cost of food rises, it then means that they're not even able to feed as well as they used to feed before. There's inflation immediately in the economy. And that goes with a lot of ripple effects. Beyond food inflation, it rises, it impacts other aspects of them. And so it's something government does not want to do, to be honest, to remove inflation immediately. I don't even think an 18-month plan is feasible the way the government has said it. I don't think so. It's too short to be able to avoid those grievous impact that comes with significant rise in inflation. I mean, bearing in mind that we're already battling with inflation issues arising from security challenges in northern Nigeria due to banditry, kidnapping, and what we have. So if you then couple this with removal of something, is really, really going to go to bad. So what I will say is that, like I said earlier, I mean, there's got to be way of facing it over a decent period of time, not even 1 year, not 2 years, maybe like 5 years, maybe 10 years. And you're coming up with certain alternatives to PMS, to say that even though you don't want to buy PMS, at some point you'll be able to buy certain fuels that is about the cost of subsidized PMS. And that other product will not be subsidized on its own. And like I said earlier, CNG, some economists have calculated and said that if you do not subsidize CNG, if you want to equate, the kind of energy you get compared to petrol, CNG probably sells for maybe between 130 to maybe 115. It's all kinds too, but the fact is that when you don't subsidize CNG, it's a lot cheaper to use than maybe even subsidized than PM. So there's got to be that facing, there's got to be a way of coming with those alternatives so that we don't continue to subsidize, because it's not sustainable. And what makes it even worse is that we're not even just subsidizing, we're actually subsidizing importation. Assuming it was a case of producing locally, it's a case of, yes, we're subsidizing local production, and because it looks like you are keeping the value within the Nigerian system, you're not externalizing any of those value that comes with subsidy. But in this case, we're not even subsidizing local production, but it's almost entirely the external production that you're subsidizing, which is not, it's not creating any additional employment opportunities for Nigerians, whereas it's creating opportunities in external places because Nigeria is willing to fund subsidy. So it's probably not the way to go. It's not helped us to. It's probably slowed down development rate in the past many years that we've been subsidizing PMS. But like I would like to emphasize again, I don't believe in a an instant removal of the subsidy. I think it's going to be faced over a decent period of time.
All right, let's wrap up on this note. Nigeria's revenue to GDP ratio at 7.5% remains among the lowest in the world. In order to reduce debt sustainability risk, IMF is proposing a consolidation or consideration of significant domestic revenue mobilization, which includes further increasing the value-added tax. It was at 5%, put it at 7.5%, and they're also talking about improving tax compliance. What is your reaction to all of this?
Yeah, so it's obvious that our tax revenues are low, and that's why there's a lot of emphasis on domestic revenue mobilization. Yes, but I think we've got to be chasing the right things. And for example, let's look at VAT. VAT was 5%. When VAT was raised by 50%, which is from 5% to 7.5%, the VAT collection did not rise by 50% because it doesn't work that way. And so even if you think of increasing VAT to maybe even 15%, you're not likely to get that same level of increase in VAT revenue. So I personally do not think that that's the priority now. Maybe it's a possibility, but I don't think that's priority. And I'm going to give you an example of something I think government should be focusing on when we're talking about raising tax revenues. And I think raising tax revenues from a personal income tax perspective should take in many other jurisdictions, particularly in the developed world. Personal income taxes by far ranks the highest sources of revenue because it's the tax the individuals pay. That's what contributes to the bulk of the revenues you have in that economy. But the reality in Nigeria is that, the personal income tax doesn't even rank. It doesn't even rank top three. You've got the VAT up there, the petroleum profit tax there, and maybe the corporate tax there. Those are the biggest stuff of tax. So what that tells you is that the guys paying taxes are the corporates. It's the corporate economy that is paying taxes, the formal economy. Outside that, nobody pays taxes. And so I think what we should be focusing on really is to improve the compliance rates largely from a personal income tax perspective, and that's collected at the state level. The state level is closer to individuals and it's closer to government. The state government have a lot of oversights on individuals. Of course, they issue driver's licenses and they have access to individuals. People have children in schools here and there. So there's oversight over the individuals that are supposed to pay those taxes. So if the state governments are willing to collect those taxes from the individual, they will be able to collect them. So I think that's a lot more. I think there should be a lot more focus on even recovering taxes from current areas of non-compliance instead of just raising the tax rate. I think we already have enough taxes. Maybe the rates are just fine. What we need to prioritize now is actual collection. Government needs to be able to take the bull by the horn to collect taxes. So I know this typically comes with the reaction that when people pay taxes, there's then inflation. But what comes to my mind is that maybe the reason Nigerians are not able to demand accountability is because many of us don't contribute as much into the government. We don't pay lots, and so it's probably convenient not to demand accountability. So maybe if the bulk of Nigerians are paying their taxes regularly, it's easier to put pressure on that government. Say you need to do this, you need to do that. So in all what IMF has said around raising tax revenue, it's the bit around tax compliance, raising tax compliance with that interests me the most, that I think we should put a lot of focus on. And in trying to whether you're raising tax rate or not, I don't think it needs to. I think it needs to be based on some macroeconomic modeling. So you want to look through the numbers. You want to model what the impact will look like. If I raise it by 5%, or if I reduce it by 2%, what is it going to look like? And that should be the basis of. That should guide the decision making. So you shouldn't say that my tax rate is 7.5%. I want to raise VAT by 50%. So it therefore means I need to raise the rates by 50%. So from 7.5 to maybe like 11%. Surely doesn't work that way. So you want to do some detailed study to check what should be my ideal tax rate. Thinking about a lot of factors put together. So it's a whole lot of study requiring economists and maybe people in the private sector and all that coming together to come and do this modeling together and see, okay, what makes sense. There's got to be some research work, some study in backing up government decisions and not just relying on IMF advice come. Of course, it's nice to look through what IMF has said as a starting point, but then I don't think you should just take a decision strictly on that basis. You want to also do your own further search, your own studies to be able to come up with a decision that you
All
think is
right.
of the best benefit for the government and for the people at large.
All right, a beautiful way to leave it. Senior Manager Tax Regulatory at Deloitte, Mr. Najim Yusuf. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. We really do appreciate this and making sense of this topic.
Thank you for having me today. Good to be here.